But I want to thank the witnesses for being here today and for helping us understand the multiple issues around transport systems. And we all know that accessible and inclusive transport is a really important enabler for participation in normal life events necessary for work, for socialising, independence, education, so many things. And yet the impact of poor and accessible transport is somehow not fully appreciated by the state as a major barrier for disabled people and their families. You also mentioned the additional transport and related costs faced by disabled people and their households, from major investment in vehicles to expensive additional journeys and having to use taxis. It's worth noting that even yesterday the Social Democrats had a motion that was passed in the Dáil seeking an action plan on the cost of disability. And that report outlines the extra costs faced by disabled people in Ireland in relation to transport, and the additional cost of having a disability in Ireland is up to over 12,000 annually. So we can only hope the government acts on that and listens to your points on the likes of the Motorised Transport Grant, mobility allowance, and the disabled drivers and disabled passengers scheme. The discontinuation of the mobility allowance and Motorised Transport Grant for new applicants in 2013 was disgraceful in itself, but that no adequate replacement has been developed nearly 8 years later is just truly shocking, and I think really difficult for people to get their heads around. I don't think the vast majority of the public know that. The situation is another clear violation of individual rights under the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, both the right to equal access to transport in Article 9 and independent living in Article 19. I think we all agree on the need for public transport, and as a rural TD, I'm really aware of the necessity of private transport and the need for targeted supports in relation to that, and it being a vital resource for disabled people. For Family Carers Ireland, in your opening statement, you rightly raised the point that a one-size-fits-all model mobility support simply just doesn't work for disabled people, and there's a complexity of interacting issues and conditions that can affect an individual's mobility, which can change over time and sometimes quickly. But the government departments and revenue commissioners have insisted on a very kind of medicalised model which focused on impairments rather than individual capacities. So I just wonder if you could elaborate for the committee on how you think the system should work for mobility support. We'd like quite specific things that we can recommend as a committee. For the Disabled Drivers Association, you outlined how little has changed since the 1960s concerning accessing the tax relief scheme. So again, real specifics on what application process and criteria would be more suitable would be helpful for the committee. And if there's time here, I might have other questions to come in afterwards.
Okay. So we will go to Kenneth first, and then to Pat, and then back to Catherine and Damien. So Kenneth, you want to?
Just in terms of, I suppose we've had discussions with a couple of other groups about this as well. Yeah, you're correct in saying that it is a very medicalised model, with, an approximation, pick a few categories, and that's roughly what should cover anyone that needs it. And I think maybe look at it in rather than it being a medical model, certainly some kind of basically almost like an occupational therapist's assessment, even if that's within the state system, that there should be an assessment of somebody's needs on a more global view, and then an assessment been made of that, and then that the benefits based on a recommendation within certain categories or whatever, that it should flow from that, but that it should be based on a broader spectrum of considerations than a strict, narrow criteria. That there should be an assessment and maybe a recommendation towards a level or a level 1 or a level 2 or a level, something of that nature, where the individual needs is being considered. Network, we have the people to do that. That's another. I mean, at the moment we're using senior area medical officers within the system, and part of the issue was they had other responsibilities, and particularly during COVID, they had a lot of other responsibility. So the system's under pressure. Any people maybe find a better source and a better model in terms of that almost occupational therapist type view of what a person's needs are in terms of mobility and where transport fits in, or adaptive transports fits in that model, if that's what the scheme is about. So that's sort of where we are on that particular aspect.
Pat, do you want to make any comment?
No, just as Ken said, it's not going to be tailor-made for everyone. I suppose maybe to identify your budget or whatever, and like it's more an OT type situation. People like that would have to be on the board to identify the areas and all that. But look, as a person with a disability, we know it's not going to be tailor-made. You know, it'll be like a point system, you know, everyone will be kind of graded and somewhere like that. It has to be kept simplified, you know, that's the main thing. It has to be kept simplified, because if we go down the road of too tailor-made, we'll be back to the 1960s and we'll have nothing. You know, so I look at, in fairness, there's a lot of capable people there. When the heads are put together, the answers will come, but it's just, I think there hasn't been enough of pressure put to get a deadline and to get it happening, you know. But I think, in fairness, Ken and everyone else has said enough about that, you know, the areas that we should look at. Thank you.
Catherine?
Just to go back to the mobility allowance and what could be done. Actually, the mobility allowance worked, and the reason it was removed was because Equal Status Act. So rather than extend it to over the age of 66, it was removed. So actually reinstate it, open it up. So that type of system worked. It was an allowance. It was allowed for flexibility. So to us, that would be what would be required. But open it up rather than remove it, which was done. And I know that's the fear with the other system as well, that rather than make it better, it'll be completely taken off. Obviously, none of us want to see that. So.
Okay.
I think the old system had its uses in some ways, and that you had a need for primary medical cert for certain situations, and it probably worked. But it also came about in a time when people with a huge amount of intellectual difficulties were put away in institutions, and they were brought out on buses to some place. The whole scenario has changed now, where an awful lot of people live at home, but they are now prisoners in their home because they haven't got the means to have this freedom to get out and about. The individualisation that's talked about is denied them and denied their carers, because without the means for appropriate and adequate transport and vehicles that meet their needs rather than what somebody else thinks they should have, you know. And so a system that looks at the current reality of people now needs to be done, you know. Thank you.
Yeah, obviously, Holly. Yeah.
I was just wondering for the committee if anybody could elaborate specifically on the challenges for disabled people in rural areas. I think it would be valuable for the committee to hear about that. And the cost of disability report gave an overview of the additional expense for people with disabilities in terms of mobility and transport, and we know that. But I just wondered if there's any more things in terms of, say, lived experience that anyone would like to share, because I think sometimes that's the thing that people relate to the most, and sometimes spurs change, even though we shouldn't have to draw on those experiences. Just if anybody wanted to, that would be appreciated.
I suppose living in a rural community, it's all right if you're going to, you know, a wedding, you know, maybe 2 or 3 functions a year. It is possible to organise and have everything in place. But I mean, if there's a few people, a wheelchair, you know, other things to bring along, it's just not practical to be organising to that level of organising every time. So if, you know, if the like we'll say the disabled drivers tax scheme was great for me, I am independent, I can go in the car on my own or whatever else. But like we'll say for families, you know, that there would be an adapted vehicle. It's all right for just 1 day or 2 or whatever in the year, but like, be it rural, be it urban, it is just vital that these schemes, like it's just the whole organisation around it. It's just, it's just not possible to do every time. If someone is going here and there, if you, like in a family situation, if you have children that you have to bring to school, if you have any other dependent children that you have to get up in the morning, that you have to bring to a thing, you might all fit in together. So it's just like, to be fair, people don't realise it. I keep calling him Sean with the Dermot, is it with the children? Damien, sorry. Like, people don't realise the amount of organisation and planning that has to go in for a day trip, But like, if a person has their own vehicle, their own independence, by whatever means we get it, mobility grants, all of these issues, we can do the organising ourselves. We're capable of doing it in a lot of cases. There's no need for people to be planning for us. We can do it if we get the simple tools to get on the ladder and have the supports there to do it.
Okay. All right. Okay. Damien, yeah.
The lived experience. Sometimes it's very easy because there's a normality that's, say, in our house that nobody else has. But we've had to normalise things that for things to work for us. So the use of hoists and all that kind of stuff. So our girls are in nappies, so we've huge extra costs. Thankfully the HSE supply that, but they don't pay the bins charges for all those nappies, that kind of stuff. I'm not giving out, but it would help. We get as part of the carers grant, we get the homemakers grant, I think, and we get €35 a month towards bills, which again, it's great. But we have to have electricity on the whole time. Our girls are on pumps, they're on hoists, electric showers, all of that. And certainly €35 a month is a great help towards it. But my electricity bill, which I got the other day, is €312, and that's every time, And okay, I mean, for us that's normal because that's what's involved. I had to bring the girls into James's hospital yesterday to get blood tests. I couldn't get a wheelchair parking space anywhere in it. I drove around the hospital 2 or 3 times. So there's huge difficulties like that because, again, the van is slightly larger than the car space. Plus, you need a space at the end for your tail lift and your hoist to come out, I eventually got a space. So planning takes a lot longer, and you have to give yourself a lot longer to get to places because there's so many other things. You've no certainty. And I've no faith that the new children's hospital will be any better equipped for families who will have to use that, who are in our similar situation. In many ways, the state is extremely helpful to people with disabilities through the medical card scheme. It covers the cost of a lot of things. But there's lots of other things that are not costed in it, We don't have any carers coming into the house with us at all. So anything that has to be done, we are doing it. It's never been offered to us. We've never looked for it. We can manage. But I know if I have to go look for it, I probably won't get it because you've managed all these years. Unless I break a leg or Mary dies or she has a stroke or something, then it's extreme, and we get probably an hour in the morning and half an hour in the evening, which is no good because the needs are so different to that. So an awful lot of carers behind their front doors are doing an awful lot of things that people, even on the street, or certainly in other, just know nothing about. And people are proud. It's nobody else's business. But yet they suffer because of that. Sometimes we suffer because of that, because the amount of things you can do are so limited without some kinds of support. So in relation to transport, yes, it's great that in a way the support that is there. But in all honesty, it's a minimum. And it's a chore, and it's very difficult every time you want to change your van or need to change it or your whatever, And nowadays you can't even get a van because of the shortage in supply. I'm on a list since last November, and I'm told it still won't be available probably by this November. So there's reality like that. And it's not so you can pick out any car or any vehicle. You can, because say, of our specific needs, the very specific type of vehicles that you need, and they're just not there. And we're lucky enough, we're patient. Well, for a bit longer anyway. But not everyone can be patient because their needs are such that they're on the edge nearly all the time.